Now we're going to come back to talking to another banking incumbent, and also to SWIFT. Because we've all heard the dumb pipe argument. We've all heard about banks being disintermediated, nothing more than infrastructure players locked in a race to drop cost and deliver utility. Now we're going to hear from a bank which has a plan on how it's going to stay at the very heart of lending. Tony and Stephen.
Okay, hi everyone. If you're wondering, I'm the boring banker and this is the boring SWIFT guy, okay? And what we'll do in the next 20 minutes is talk to you about what we think are some answers to the open banking conundrum. And really we start with a kind of optimistic perspective on the future of platforms. You know, e-commerce, marketplaces, they have only just begun. And you know, this is an interesting McKinsey study from a couple of years back that talked about the emerging ecosystems, and enormous amounts of economic activity will be concentrated in those ecosystems. Now, when you are a banker, you look at the world in a very particular way. You stand on top of a skyscraper, you look out in a great city, and you don't necessarily see the same things that other people see. What you see is credit. You know, credit that is required to build the infrastructure, credit that's required to buy the houses, credit which is required to make economic activity work. And in this new landscape of platforms, of digital platforms, there's an enormous requirement for credit. And the questions are, who's going to provide that credit? And how is that credit going to be provided to these digital platforms? And some of the instruments that the financial institutions have got available to provide credit into these new platforms are fairly old. For example, isn't it strange in this day and age that the primary mechanism for banks to deliver balance sheet into digital platforms is the credit card? And the credit card is a bundle of services. You know, it's payments, it's credit, it's loyalty, it's insurance, it's acceptance, it's a bundle of services. But in this world of platforms, these services will be disaggregated and reconstructed through APIs. So we want to address some of the challenges for banks in this new world. And look, one of the big challenges with open banking and PSD2 is that many banks perceive it as being an absolute no-win situation. Many banks perceive it as being laying the infrastructure for them to be disintermediated. And they look to the east, and they look at the Armageddon that's already taken place in the Chinese banking market, with the 200 Chinese banks disintermediated by the Alipay and the WeChat Pay, and Alipay practicing, you know, complete financial intermediation, lending to sellers on the marketplace, lending to buyers, capturing merchant fees, capturing FX. You know, that business is worth, the Alipay business is worth $150 billion, not far off the market capitalization of Citibank. So if that's what the future looks like, the banks have got a lot to fear. And open banking, in the mind of many bankers, is something to fear or something to comply with. So what we want to do today is to provide a very important change of mindset for the banks. We want to show how banks can make money from open banking, maintain their core economic role, and actually, you know, I would, in a slight contrast to the last speaker, you know, banks are balance sheets. Fundamentally, banks are balance sheets. And we want to show a way for those balance sheets to be relevant to the growth of the digital economy. So banks have got many challenges and many threats. And the payment space is extraordinarily noisy. You know, it's cryptocurrency, it's DLT, it's machine learning, it's big data, and all that kind of stuff. And you know, if a bank has a branch that looks like an Apple store and a sexy mobile app and a machine, some data scientists and machine learning and their DLT pilot, if they've got all that and they lose the lending, the bank is dead. So the core need for a bank in this digital future is to keep the lending relevant. Now, what do the merchants and marketplaces want? Now, layer one of this, lower cost of collections, lower chargebacks, lower fraud, higher acceptance rates, all of that stuff is meant to be delivered by the payment mechanism that we call request to pay. Now, request to pay is delivered in the world in two different ways. It's delivered in India through a clearing system, through a UPI. It's delivered in Europe through PSD2, and in open banking through, UK open banking through open banking, through individual bank APIs. Request to pay is in terms of a way of getting money from a bank account driven by strong customer authentication, has a great potential to be dead on arrival as far as the merchants are concerned because of the friction involved in the strong customer authentication. We're very interested as a transaction bank in making request to pay work. You might have seen our press release on Monday where we've become a PISP in UK open banking. We want to make request to pay work. But request to pay is essentially delivering a pay now experience, paying from a checking account. And if that reduced costs, there's this statistic that in the airline industry, global airline profitability, $35 billion. Global airline cost of collections through cards, $8 billion. If request to pay can reduce the cost of collections, then many merchants will be very happy. But it is necessary but not sufficient, because merchants also want to sell more stuff. They want maximum purchasing power at the point of purchase. And maximum purchasing power is what you've got in your checking account and the credit that is available to you. And again, at the moment, the mechanism by which banks make balance sheet available to the digital economy is largely through cards. So we want to do something very simple, but quite radical. And that simple thing is in the same way that we've got an API standards emerging for Pay Now, we've developed an API standard for Pay Later, so that banks can deliver their balance sheet to digital marketplaces through a standardized API. Now, let that sink in. The choice for a digital marketplace is, do you want to do a proprietary connection to a small balance sheet or open standardized connections to enormous balance sheets? So this is what we've built. First thing is on the customer experience. It's very simple, right? It's not radical. You're on a checkout page, you're buying a flat screen TV, there's two new buttons. Button one says, Pay Now. If you click on that button, you go into a request to pay type of experience. You authenticate with your bank, you pay from your checking account, you pay now. That's payment initiation, 101. And again, there are remaining questions as to whether that's a good customer experience through strong customer authentication. We're suggesting that there's another button on that checkout. That second button is Pay Later by Bank. You click on that button, you go into your bank, and your bank offers you an installment loan. So what we're suggesting is a way for banks to make money from open banking. They may lose the customer interface. They may lose the payments revenue. Banks cannot afford to lose the lending relationship because a bank is a balance sheet. And banks will have to find new ways of delivering balance sheet And I've got an enormous opportunity to deliver balance sheet into the digital economy through APIs. So what we're defining is an API standard which is global in nature, based upon open standards. And we invite all of you to participate in the finalization of that standard. But there's a very important point. The bank's natural tendency is to do things proprietary. We're suggesting that in this new era of what we call transactional finance, what you might call balance sheet as a service, it's critical for the banks to adopt an open standard. And that's where I'll hand over to Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. OK, yes. We've heard it all morning. Adoption and critical mass is what we want from a service like this. It's really not going to work if a merchant has to implement a different API for every bank that their customers bank with. That's really a non-starter. That fragmentation that we heard about from Gavin this morning and various other panelists who've been up here on the stage today is something that you have to avoid from the very outset. You need to avoid fragmentation, and you need also to make sure that the standards that you provide around this give you the kind of downstream interoperability that you need. A loan is going to turn into a payment is going to have to be cleared and settled. You want to make sure that the data that you capture through the API that you're offering is compatible, not just with other APIs, but also with the rest of the financial infrastructure. So what do we need? We need a common specification. We need a detailed, well-described, well-defined common specification. Someone needs to own that specification. It can't be one bank or another that owns it. We need some neutral governance around that specification. We want compatibility. We want to make sure that that spec is compatible with other standards that are already in use. We don't want to keep reinventing the wheel when we do new things. And finally, we need an implementation that's easy to implement. You know, it's from way back when Steve Ballmer at Microsoft was talking about how to get people on a platform. It was all about developers, but it's the same thing here, right? You need to make these standards easy to adopt, easy for anybody who wants to call these APIs to be able to get on them, understand them, digest them, and start to implement them. So this is something that, in a slightly different world, Swift has been doing for many years, right? We've been the neutral standards body for the industry. We've been making messaging standards that have kept the international payments ticking over for the last 40 years. We're a neutral, industry-owned organization, and therefore we're in a very good place to be making standards. We also have great industry participation. We're owned by the financial industry, but we also have a great deal of outreach into the fintech community through things like InnoTribe, and also with other standards bodies. So at the moment, we're talking to fintechs, we're talking to Citi, but a number of other banks as well as part of this project. We're also talking to the Berlin Group and others who've been active in this standardization space around APIs to try and bring everybody into a big tent, right, to thrash out a standard. And the final thing that we have access to is ISO 20022. This is quite important. ISO 20022 is the backbone of the payment systems, right? We're moving to ISO 20022 in a variety of different clearing and settlement mechanisms around the world. Instant payment schemes that are being set up. The payment schemes are going to be delivering these payments. When you want to buy your flat screen TV, there's going to be a payment made. Those are going to be based on ISO 20022 if they're not already. So capturing data up front that's compatible with those things, is going to be compatible with the back offices, is going to ease the integration, is going to make the whole thing a lot more seamless and a lot easier to implement. So it's super important that we do that. So we've been working away as a standards body with these various different stakeholders, and we've come up with a number of things. We've come up, first of all, with a nice, clean, well-defined API and process flow that delineates very, very clearly the roles and responsibilities of the different actors in this chain and the different interactions that they're going to have. So we've tried to make that as standard as possible, again, so that there isn't any ambiguity about how this thing should be implemented and rolled out. We've also gone into the technology. We've reused some of the components in terms of the business definitions from ISO 20022 to ensure that we have definitions that are easy to assimilate. But we've also used the technology that API developers are familiar with, so Swagger, Swagger Hub, these kinds of components, to publish an API standard in one place centrally that's been agreed by all the different stakeholders, banks, fintechs, and other standards bodies. And this is going to be published very shortly and made available to, well, to all of you. So that if you want to get involved in this pay later exercise, and you want to think of that, well, implementing it from one side or another, either as a bank or as a service provider or as a merchant, then these will be open specifications to which you're welcome to come and comment on and ultimately to implement. So that's really what we wanted to say, that we have, you know, a fantastic, I think, example here of how we can move beyond PSD2 as a compliance question into PSD2 and open banking more generally as a means to expose the bank services in a new way. And the fact that standardization is going to be required in order to do that in a way that is going to be easy to assimilate and easy for merchants in particular to take advantage of.
So you know, what do we hope for? We hope that by showing banks that open banking is a way of making money, not just a threat, that they will engage more positively. We hope that you will join us to finalize version 1.0 of the Transactional Finance API. We hope that as the rollout of bank APIs on retail banking and commercial banking has only just begun. And this is the point, this is the critical point of time to make sure that those APIs are based upon open standards and not proprietary solutions. We've all seen what's happened in electronic banking with every bank having its own proprietary solution. So this is the start of platform banking, of banks making their services available through APIs and plugging those standard APIs into the other platforms where customers, retail customers and business customers want to do business. And again, leave you with this invitation to talk to us. We're here for the rest of the day and engage with us in the formation of this standard. So thank you very much.
Thank you.